Sometimes we think we know our loved ones, but what happens when secrets and betrayal turn everything upside down? This story will show you just how fragile trust can be and how hard it is to rebuild love after it's been broken. Watch until the end to find out if this family can find their way to forgiveness and healing, or if their relationships will be lost forever. The answer will shock you. I used to think we had it all figured out. 18 years of marriage to Emma, a house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, a beautiful daughter named Sophia, and steady careers that kept us secure. On the outside, we looked perfect. Two people who beat the odds of marrying young and made a life together. But lately, that perfection feels like a distant memory. Emma's a surgeon, a damn good one. She saves lives every day, and I'm proud of her, but her job is relentless. I can't remember the last time she came home before midnight or sat down for a meal that wasn't microwaved leftovers. Most nights, she's so exhausted she barely speaks, and when she does, it's about work. I don't blame her. What she does is important, but that doesn't make the silence any easier to bear. Working from home as an IT specialist sounded like a dream at first. No commute, flexible hours. But after a while, the solitude started to creep in. The house is too quiet during the day, and when Emma's gone late into the night, it feels even emptier. Our daughter, Sophia, is 17 now. She's got her own life, school, friends, plans for the future. I'm proud of her too, but she doesn't need me the way she used to. Then Lily moved in. Emma's younger sister has always had this way about her. She's magnetic. Where Emma is all discipline and focus, Lily is warmth and laughter. She's been staying with us for a couple of months now, trying to get back on her feet after some financial trouble. At first, her presence was a distraction, a light in the monotony of my days. She'd cook dinner, sit with me while I worked, ask questions about things no one else cared to ask about. It felt nice to be seen again. At least, that's what I told myself at first. But somewhere along the way, my thoughts started drifting where they shouldn't. I tried to push them down, ignore them, but the loneliness I'd been carrying made me crave the attention. It wasn't just physical, though, God help me, there was that too. It was the way she looked at me, like I mattered in a way I hadn't felt in years. Tonight, everything fell apart. It was late. Sophia had gone to bed, and Lily and I were sitting in the living room. She mentioned her back had been bothering her, and before I could think twice, I offered to help. My hands were on her shoulders, kneading out the tension, when I heard the door open. I froze. Emma stood there in her scrubs, her face pale with exhaustion. Her eyes landed on us, and I saw something in her expression shift. Confusion, hurt, maybe anger, though she didn't say a word. She just stood there, staring, before finally turning away and heading upstairs. I didn't move. I couldn't. My heart was pounding, and my stomach churned with guilt. Lily was the first to break the silence. "You should talk to her," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't look at me, and I couldn't bring myself to look at her. I nodded, but my legs felt like lead. When I finally stood, I hesitated at the foot of the stairs, unsure if I had the courage to face what waited for me at the top. As I climbed the stairs, each step felt heavier than the last. My mind raced, replaying the moment Emma walked in, her blank expression, the way she didn't say a word before retreating. That silence was louder than anything she could have shouted at me. Our bedroom door was slightly ajar, and I paused outside, my hand hovering over the doorknob. What was I going to say? It's not what it looks like. It was exactly what it looked like. No matter how innocent the act might have been in that moment, my thoughts hadn't been. And Emma, with her sharp instincts, had to know that. I pushed the door open slowly. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, her elbows on her knees, her hands clasped tightly together. Her scrubs were rumpled, and there were faint shadows under her eyes, deeper than usual. She didn't look up when I entered. "Emma," I started, my voice cracking. "Can we talk?" She didn't respond right away. Instead, she let out a long, shaky breath, like she was trying to keep herself from unraveling. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, sharp enough to cut through me. "Do you love her?" she asked, still not looking at me. The question hit me like a punch to the gut. "No, Emma, it's not. Don't. she interrupted, finally turning her head to face me. Her eyes, usually so kind and full of life, were glassy, with unshed tears. Don't insult me by pretending it's nothing. I know what I saw. I felt my chest tighten, the weight of my own guilt pressing down on me. I don't love her, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It's just, I've been lonely, Emma. You're always at work, and You're lonely? She laughed bitterly, standing up. You think I'm not? Do you have any idea what it's like to come home after a 16-hour shift, after watching someone's husband or wife die on my operating table, and then feel like a stranger in my own house? Her words hit me harder than I expected. Of course, I'd known she was exhausted, but I hadn't realized how much it had been eating away at her, too. We were both drowning in our own ways, and instead of pulling her closer, I'd let myself drift further away. I'm sorry, I said, my voice breaking. Emma, I've been selfish. I wasn't thinking. No, you weren't, she snapped, cutting me off again. She turned away, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. I don't even know what to say to you right now. I don't know if I'm angry or just hurt. The silence that followed was suffocating. I wanted to reach out to her, to pull her into my arms, and tell her I'd fix everything, but I didn't know if she'd even let me. Finally, she turned back toward me, her expression unreadable. I need some time, she said. I can't do this right now. And with that, she brushed past me, heading to the guest room and closing the door behind her. I stood there in the empty bedroom, the walls closing in around me, wondering if I'd just destroyed everything we'd built together. I didn't sleep that night. The bed felt too big, too cold, without Emma beside me. I stayed in the same spot for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything she'd said. Her words echoed in my head, each one cutting deeper than the last. I'd been selfish, blind to how much she'd been struggling while I wallowed in my own loneliness. When I finally got up, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The silence was the kind that made your chest ache, the kind that felt like the calm before a storm. I checked Sophia's room first. Her door was closed, and I could hear faint music playing inside. At least she was still asleep, blissfully unaware of the turmoil brewing just a few feet away. Lily's door was closed too, and I didn't dare knock. I didn't want to face her, didn't even know what I'd say if I did. So I headed downstairs, hoping the routine of making coffee might offer some sort of distraction. As I waited for the coffee to brew, I thought about Emma, about the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. She'd always been strong, determined, the kind of person who charged headfirst into challenges while I stood back, analyzing from the sidelines. She was my anchor, my partner, and now, I wasn't sure if she even wanted to look at me, let alone talk. The sound of footsteps startled me, and I turned to see Lily standing in the kitchen doorway. She was dressed in sweats, her hair pulled into a messy bun. She looked nervous, like she wasn't sure if she should say anything. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning," I replied, my voice strained. I didn't meet her eyes. I couldn't. She walked to the fridge, pulling out the orange juice. The silence between us was unbearable, heavy with everything left unsaid. Finally, she broke it. "John, don't." I interrupted, shaking my head. "We don't need to talk about it." "Yes, we do," she said firmly. "I shouldn't have let things get this far. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, especially Emma." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of anger. At her, at myself, at the whole damn situation. But it was quickly swallowed by guilt. This wasn't just her fault. I'd let it happen. I'd been the one who crossed a line. "She saw us, Lily," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "And now, I don't even know if she'll forgive me." Lily looked down, biting her lip. "She loves you," she said after a moment. "That's the only reason she hasn't already packed her bags." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that Emma's love for me was strong enough to withstand my mistakes. But the look in her eyes last night, the way she turned away without a word, it felt like I'd already lost her. I sat on the edge of the bed in the guest room, the early morning sunlight creeping through the blinds. I hadn't slept. I couldn't. My mind wouldn't stop replaying the scene from the night before. John's hands on Lily, the way he froze when he saw me. I'd gone over it so many times in my head that I wasn't sure anymore what hurt the most. The act itself or the fact that he thought he could hide his loneliness from me. I knew John was struggling. I wasn't blind to it. He'd always been the quiet one, the steady one. But in the last year, something had changed. We both changed. My job had consumed me in ways I hadn't anticipated, and I'd let it. I told myself I was doing it for the family, for him, for Sophia, but in the process, I'd started to lose sight of what we had, of who we were. But knowing I'd neglected him didn't make his betrayal any easier to swallow. It didn't excuse the way he'd turned to my sister for comfort. My sister. That part cut the deepest. Lily was supposed to be my support, someone I could trust implicitly. And now I didn't know if I could even look at her. I glanced at the clock on the nightstand. It was nearly 8 a.m., which meant Sophia would be up soon. For her sake, I had to pull myself together. Whatever else was happening between John and me, she didn't need to see the cracks. Not yet. She deserved to feel like her world was still intact, even if mine was falling apart. When I finally went downstairs, the smell of coffee hit me, and I was grateful for something that felt normal. John was sitting at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a mug, staring into it like it held all the answers he needed. Lily wasn't there, and I was relieved. I wasn't ready to face her. He looked up when I walked in, his eyes bloodshot and rimmed with shadows. "Emma," he said softly, like he wasn't sure if I'd respond. I didn't. I walked to the coffee maker, poured myself a cup, and leaned against the counter. The silence between us stretched on, heavy and oppressive. "I'm sorry," he finally said, his voice trembling. "For everything. I never wanted to hurt you." I took a sip of coffee, letting the warmth steady me. "You didn't just hurt me, John. You hurt us. You hurt this family." "I know," he said, his voice cracking. "I know I messed up, and I'll do whatever it takes to fix it. But Emma, please don't shut me out. Talk to me." I turned to face him, my arms crossed tightly over my chest. "What do you want me to say? That I forgive you? That I'm okay with you with her?" "No," he said quickly, shaking his head. "I don't expect that. He stopped, his shoulders sagging. I just want a chance to make this right. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that we could find a way back to what we once were. But the image of him and Lily was burned into my mind, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake it. "I need time," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "Time to figure out if I can even do this." He nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "I'll give you whatever you need." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I turned and walked out of the kitchen, my coffee untouched, my heart heavier than ever. I always thought our family was solid. Not perfect, obviously, no one's family is, but solid. Sure, Mom worked long hours, and Dad was kind of a homebody, but they made it work. They always seemed like a team, balancing each other out. Lately, though, something's been off. It's like the air in the house is different, heavier. I can feel it even when no one says anything. I first noticed it a few weeks ago. Mom came home late, like always, but she barely said a word to Dad before going straight to bed. That wasn't unusual, but the look on his face stuck with me. He seemed, I don't know, distant? Sad? It's hard to explain. And then there's Aunt Lily. Ever since she moved in, she's been around Dad a lot. They talk, they laugh. She's great and all, but it's weird how much time they spend together. This morning I came downstairs and the kitchen was tense. Mom and Dad were barely looking at each other. Mom had her arms crossed, and Dad looked like he was about to cry. I stayed in the hallway, out of sight, because something about the way they were talking made me feel like I shouldn't interrupt. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught bits and pieces, words like hurt in time. Whatever it was, it wasn't good. When Mom left the kitchen, Dad stayed there, staring at his coffee like it had all the answers. I thought about going in to say something, but what would I even say? "Hey, Dad, everything okay?" It was obvious that it wasn't. Aunt Lily wasn't around, which was unusual for her. She's always up early, making breakfast or watching TV. I figured maybe she was staying out of the way, which was fine by me. I didn't feel like seeing her either. For some reason, whenever I think about her lately, I feel this tightness in my chest, like I'm angry, and I don't even know why. At lunch, I finally worked up the nerve to ask Mom if everything was okay. She just gave me this tired smile and said, "Things are complicated, sophomore. But don't worry, okay? You're Dad, and I will figure it out." That was supposed to make me feel better, I think, but it didn't. If anything, it made me feel worse. Because if there's one thing I've learned about adults, it's that when they tell you not to worry, it usually means you should. I never meant for things to get so complicated. When Emma offered to let me stay here, I jumped at the chance. I was drowning between the debt, the eviction notice, and feeling like I had no one to turn to. Her offer felt like a lifeline. She's always been the strong one, the one who has it all together. I've always admired her for that, even envied her a little. Living here at first felt like stepping into a world I could only dream about. A beautiful house, a family that seemed perfect, a stability I hadn't felt in years. Emma and John were kind to me, welcoming. Sophia, too. I was determined not to screw it up. But then, slowly, things started to shift. John and I had always gotten along, but something about the way he looked at me changed. Or maybe it wasn't him. Maybe it was me. He was lonely. That much was obvious. Emma was gone so much, and I could see how it wore on him. At first, I thought I was just being supportive. A kind word here, a little extra attention there. It felt harmless, like I was helping. But deep down, I think I knew I was crossing a line. The night it all came to a head is burned into my memory. Sitting there on the couch with John, his hands on my shoulders, I wasn't thinking about Emma or what it might look like if she walked in. I wasn't thinking at all. I was just caught up in the moment, in the warmth of his touch, in the way it felt to be seen again. And then she was there. The look on Emma's face. I don't think I'll ever forget it. It wasn't just anger. It was hurt. Disbelief. Like the foundation of everything she trusted had crumbled beneath her feet. She didn't say anything, but she didn't have to. The silence was worse than anything she could have shouted. Since then, I've been avoiding her. Avoiding John, too. I don't know what to say to either of them. Every time I think about it, I feel this overwhelming sense of guilt, like I've betrayed the one person who has always been in my corner. I spent the morning in my room, trying to figure out what to do. Should I leave? Apologize? Would Emma even want to hear an apology? Or would it just make things worse? When I finally came downstairs, I found Sophia sitting at the dining table, scrolling on her phone. She glanced up at me, her expression unreadable. "Hey," I said awkwardly, trying to sound normal. "Hey," she replied, her tone cool. She went back to her phone, but I could feel her watching me out of the corner of her eye. Did she know? Did she suspect? The thought made my stomach turn. I didn't want to be the reason this family fell apart. But maybe I already was. By the time the sun set, the house was eerily quiet. Sophia had gone upstairs after dinner, leaving Emma and me in the living room. I could feel the tension between us, thick and suffocating, as we sat on opposite ends of the couch. She hadn't said much to me all day, and every passing second of silence felt like a nail in the coffin of whatever trust we had left. I finally worked up the courage to speak. "Emma, we need to talk about Lily." She didn't look at me right away. Instead, she stared at the coffee table, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the wood. When she finally turned to me, her eyes were sharp, piercing. "What is there to talk about, John?" she said, her voice calm, but edged with something cold. "She's my sister. She needed help, and I gave it to her. What you've done with that trust is the real problem." Her words hit hard, but I couldn't argue. She was right. I'd crossed a line, and there was no excuse that could make it better. "I know I messed up," I said, my voice low. "But I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I let my loneliness get the better of me. It wasn't her fault." Emma let out a bitter laugh. "Wasn't her fault?" she repeated. "She knew what she was doing, John. She's not a child. And you." She stopped, shaking her head. "You're my husband. You should have known better." "I know," I said, my hands gripping the edge of the couch. "I know I should have, and I'm sorry. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you let me. But Emma, we can't keep avoiding this. We have to figure out what to do about Lily." "What do you mean, what to do about Lily?" she snapped. "She's my sister. She has nowhere else to go." "I get that," I said carefully. "But having her here, it's only making things worse. For you, for me, for us." Emma stood up abruptly, crossing her arms. "So what are you suggesting, John? That I kick her out? That I choose between my sister and my marriage?" Her words stung, but I didn't back down. "I'm not asking you to choose," I said. I'm asking you to consider what's best for everyone. This situation, it's toxic, and I don't see how we can start to fix things between us with her here." She stared at me for a long moment, her jaw tight, her eyes blazing with a mix of anger and pain. "You don't get to dictate what happens to Lily," she said finally. "Not after what you've done." And with that, she walked out of the room, leaving me sitting there in the silence, my chest aching with the weight of everything I'd ruined. The following evening, I heard Emma's footsteps outside the guest room where Lily had been staying. She didn't knock. She just opened the door and stepped inside. I stayed downstairs, pretending to read, but my ears were tuned to every sound. Lily's voice was the first to break the tension. "Emma, don't," Emma said, her tone sharp and unyielding. "Don't say a word until I've finished." The house fell silent except for Emma's voice, low but firm. I couldn't make out every word, but the anger in her tone was unmistakable. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she asked, her words clipped. "To me, to my marriage, to this family?" "I didn't mean—" Lily started, but Emma cut her off. "No," Emma said, louder this time. "You don't get to play the victim here, Lily. You knew exactly what you were doing when you got close to him. And the worst part? You knew how much I've sacrificed for this family, and you still chose to cross that line." There was a pause, and then Lily's voice, softer, more hesitant. "I wasn't trying to hurt you, Emma. I was just, I don't know. I was lonely, and he—" Emma's voice cracked, her composure slipping for the first time. "He's my husband, Lily. My husband. You don't get to lean on him when you're lonely. You don't get to make excuses for what you did." I could hear Lily start to cry, her voice trembling. I'm so sorry, Emma. I don't know what I was thinking. Emma didn't let her finish. "Sorry doesn't fix this," she said. "Sorry doesn't undo the damage you've caused. I brought you into this house because I thought I could trust you, because I wanted to help you. And you repaid me by driving a wedge into my marriage." There was another long silence, the weight of Emma's words hanging in the air. "I don't know what to do with you," Emma said finally, her voice softer but still laced with hurt. "I can't even look at you right now, Lily, and I don't know how we move forward from this." When Emma came downstairs later, her face was a mask of exhaustion and heartbreak. She didn't say anything to me as she passed, heading straight for the bedroom. I stayed on the couch, unsure if I should follow or give her space. Lily didn't come down at all that night. I wasn't stupid. I'd known for weeks that something wasn't right in our house. The tension, the weird silences, the way Mom's eyes avoided Dad's, and the way Aunt Lily suddenly seemed smaller, like she was trying to shrink herself out of existence. It all felt off. And when Mom's voice carried through the walls last night, sharp and broken, it confirmed everything I'd been suspecting. This morning, the house was quiet again, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of quiet that made your chest feel heavy, like you couldn't breathe right. I found Dad in the kitchen, staring out the window with a cup of coffee in his hand. He looked older, tired, like the weight of the world was on his shoulders. I walked in, and he didn't even notice me at first. When he finally looked up, his smile was small, forced. "Morning, kiddo," he said. I sat down across from him, my hands folded on the table. "What's going on, Dad?" He blinked, clearly caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "Don't do that," I said, my voice firmer than I intended. "Don't pretend like nothing's wrong. Mom's been upset for days, and I heard her yelling at Aunt Lily last night. Just tell me what's going on." He sighed, setting his coffee down. "Soph, it's complicated. Your mom and we're going through something right now. But it's between us, okay? You don't need to worry about it." I narrowed my eyes. "Is it about Aunt Lily?" He froze, and that told me everything I needed to know. The way his face fell, the way he suddenly couldn't meet my eyes, it was like watching someone's mask slip off, revealing something they didn't want anyone to see. "What did you do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. His head snapped up, and for a second I thought he might lie to me. But then his shoulders slumped, and he looked down at the table. "I made a mistake," he said quietly. "A big one. And it's hurt your mom. It's hurt all of us." I felt a lump rise in my throat, my mind racing to piece everything together. "With Aunt Lily?" I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't answer, but the look on his face was enough. I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. How could you? I snapped. How could you do that to Mom? To us? Sophia, listen to me. No. I yelled, my hands clenched into fists. You're supposed to be better than this, Dad. You're supposed to be the one we can trust. He reached out like he wanted to grab my hand, but I stepped back, shaking my head. I can't believe you, I said, tears stinging my eyes. I can't even look at you right now. And then I ran upstairs, slamming the door to my room behind me. For the first time in my life, my dad wasn't my hero. He was just human, and that hurt more than anything. The house was quiet again by the time I made my way upstairs. Sophia's door was closed, and I knew better than to knock. Her anger was fresh, and I didn't blame her. I had let her down, let all of them down, and now I was left trying to figure out how to pick up the pieces. Emma was in our bedroom, sitting in the chair by the window, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. She didn't look up when I entered, and I hesitated in the doorway, unsure if I was welcome. After a long moment, she spoke, her voice soft but tired. "Close the door," she said. I did as she asked, then sat on the edge of the bed, my hands clasped in my lap. The space between us felt like miles, and I wasn't sure how to bridge it. "Emma," I started, but she held up a hand, cutting me off. "I've been thinking," she said, her gaze fixed on the mug in her hands. "About us, about this family, and about whether there's anything left to save." Her words felt like a punch to the gut. "There is," I said quickly. "Emma, I know I've screwed up, but I love you. I love this family, and I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." She finally looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and anger. "Do you even know what making it right means, John? Because it's not just about saying you're sorry. It's about rebuilding trust, and I don't know if I can trust you again. Not after this." "I'll do whatever you need," I said, my voice desperate. "Counseling, space, anything. Just tell me what to do." She let out a bitter laugh. "Space? I don't even know what that would look like. You work from home, John. You're always here. And then there's Lily. What am I supposed to do about her? She's my sister. I can't just kick her out." I hesitated, knowing how much she hated ultimatums, but I couldn't avoid the truth. "Emma, I don't think we can fix this with Lily still here. Her presence, it's a constant reminder of what happened. For both of us." She sighed, setting the mug down on the windowsill. "So now you want me to choose between my sister and my marriage?" "No," I said quickly. "That's not what I'm saying. I just think it might help if we had some space from her, at least for a little while." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the conflict in her eyes. Finally, she nodded, but it wasn't a nod of agreement. It was resignation. "I'll talk to her," she said quietly. "But John, this doesn't mean I've forgiven you. It doesn't mean we're okay." "I know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "But it's a start, and I'll take it." She stood, crossing the room to the door. "I'm going to bed," she said. "You can stay, or you can go sleep on the couch. I don't care." I stayed, but I didn't sleep. The next morning, Emma was already up by the time I came downstairs. She was sitting at the dining table with a cup of coffee, staring at her phone like it was a lifeline. Her expression was unreadable, but the tension in her shoulders said enough. I didn't interrupt her. Instead, I grabbed my own coffee and retreated to the living room, giving her space. About an hour later, I heard Lily's door creak open. She stepped out cautiously, her movements hesitant, as if she could feel the weight of the house pressing down on her. She walked into the kitchen, stopping short when she saw Emma at the table. I couldn't see Emma's face from where I sat, but Lily's shoulders stiffened, and her usual easygoing demeanor vanished. "Morning," Lily said quietly. "Sit down," Emma said, her voice calm but cold. Lily hesitated for a moment before sitting across from her sister. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. I edged closer to the doorway, just out of sight but close enough to hear. "Lily," Emma began, her tone firm, "we need to talk about what happened." Lily opened her mouth to respond, but Emma held up a hand. "Let me finish," she said. "You and I both know that what happened with John was a betrayal, not just of me, but of this entire family." "I know," Lily said, her voice trembling. "Emma, I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you." Emma leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Sorry isn't enough, Lily. I brought you into this house because I wanted to help you. I trusted you. And you repaid me by crossing a line that never should have been crossed. Tears welled up in Lily's eyes, and she nodded, unable to meet Emma's gaze. I'll leave, she said softly. If that's what you need, I'll go. Emma let out a slow breath, as if she'd been bracing herself for that response. I think it's for the best, she said. You need to figure out your own life, Lily. And I need time to repair the damage this has caused. Lily wiped at her eyes, her voice cracking as she replied, I understand. I'll pack my things. Emma's voice softened slightly, but her resolve didn't waver. This doesn't mean I don't love you, she said. But right now, I need to put my family first, and you need to take responsibility for what you've done. Lily nodded, standing up abruptly. I'll be out by tomorrow, she said, her voice barely audible, before retreating back to her room. Emma stayed at the table for a long time after Lily left, staring out the window. I wanted to go to her, to offer some kind of comfort, but I knew better. This was something she needed to process on her own. That night, the house felt quieter than it ever had before. By the time the next morning rolled around, the reality of Lily leaving had settled over the house like a fog. She was in her room, packing her things quietly. The door was slightly ajar, and every now and then, I could hear the rustling of clothes and the soft scrape of boxes being moved. Sophia had been unusually quiet since the confrontation with me. I found her in the living room, curled up on the couch with her headphones on, staring blankly at the TV. I wasn't sure if she was watching or just trying to escape the tension. Either way, I didn't disturb her. Lily came downstairs around mid-morning, her suitcase in one hand and a duffel bag slung over her shoulder. Her eyes were puffy, like she hadn't slept, and her usual bright expression was replaced with something muted and fragile. Emma was in the kitchen, and when Lily appeared, she set her coffee cup down and stood, her posture stiff. Sophia must have sensed the shift because she pulled off her headphones and turned to watch. Lily, Emma said, her voice steady but strained. Do you have everything you need? Lily nodded. Yeah, I think so. For a moment, the room was silent, the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air. Finally, Lily broke it. I just want to say, I'm sorry, she said, her voice trembling. For everything, for hurting you, for putting you in this position. I never meant for any of this to happen. Emma crossed her arms, her face unreadable. I hope you use this time to figure out what you want, Lily, and to be better. Lily nodded, tears spilling over. I will. Then she turned to me, her gaze hesitant. John, she stopped, shaking her head. Goodbye. I nodded but didn't say anything. What could I say that wouldn't make things worse? Lily finally turned to Sophia, who was still sitting on the couch, watching everything unfold with wide, cautious eyes. Sophia, Lily said softly, I'm going to miss you. Sophia hesitated before nodding. Bye, Aunt Lily, she said, her tone colder than I expected. Lily flinched but didn't push further. She adjusted her bags and headed toward the door. Emma followed her to the threshold, not to say goodbye, but to ensure the moment was final. When the door clicked shut behind her, the house felt emptier, quieter, like a piece of the chaos had been removed but left a void in its place. The house had been quiet since Lily left, but it wasn't a peaceful kind of quiet. It was the kind that clung to the walls, heavy and suffocating. I thought maybe Sophia would let things go, that she'd moved past her anger and confusion, but I underestimated her. She was always sharper than I gave her credit for, and tonight she decided it was time for answers. It was after dinner, and Emma was washing dishes while I sat at the table, pretending to scroll through emails on my phone. Sophia walked in and leaned against the counter, her arms crossed. Her eyes flicked between us, sharp and unwavering. So, she began, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Are you guys ever going to tell me what's really going on? Or do I have to guess? Emma froze, her hands still in the soapy water. I looked up, caught off guard, and tried to play dumb. Soph, it's not something you need to worry about. Stop, she snapped, her voice firm. I'm not a little kid. I know something happened with Aunt Lily. I know you guys aren't okay. I'm sick of all the secrets. Emma wiped her hands on a dish towel and turned to face her. Sophia, this is between your father and me. You don't need to get involved. That's not good enough, Sophia shot back, her voice rising. I live here too. Whatever's going on is affecting all of us, and I deserve to know the truth. I glanced at Emma, hoping she'd take the lead, but she just looked at me, her expression unreadable. She was leaving it up to me. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Sophia, what happened between Lily and me, it was a mistake. A huge mistake. And it hurt your mom, and it hurt this family. I'm trying to fix it, but it's not something I'm proud of. Her eyes narrowed. What kind of mistake? My stomach twisted. I didn't want to spell it out, but she wasn't going to let me off the hook. I let things get too close with Lily. I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Nothing happened, but it got too close. Sophia stared at me, her jaw tight. So you almost cheated on Mom. With her sister. The words hung in the air, heavy and raw. Emma flinched but didn't correct her. She just stood there, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. How could you do that? Sophia asked, her voice shaking. How could you even think about doing that to Mom? To us? I don't have a good answer, I said honestly. I was lonely, and I made a terrible choice. I've hurt everyone I care about, and all I can do now is try to make it right. Sophia shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. I looked up to you, she said, her voice cracking. I thought you were better than this. And with that, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving Emma and me standing in silence, the weight of her disappointment pressing down on both of us. The night felt endless. After Sophia stormed out, the house seemed heavier than ever, the silence unbearable. Emma and I sat in the living room, neither of us saying anything for what felt like hours. Finally, she broke the quiet. She's right, you know, Emma said, her voice steady but distant. She deserved better. I deserved better. I looked at her, my chest tight with guilt. You're right, I admitted. I've let you both down in ways I never thought I would. And I'm so sorry, Emma, for everything. She nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the coffee table. I've been asking myself if we can come back from this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. If there's enough left of us to rebuild. The words hung in the air, and I could feel the weight of them crushing down on both of us. I said, my voice firm. I know I've hurt you, and I know it's going to take time, but I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose us. She looked up at me then, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and exhaustion. You say that now, she said, but do you really understand what it's going to take? This isn't just about saying the right things, John. It's about actions, about rebuilding trust one brick at a time. And I don't even know if I have the energy for that right now. Her words hit hard, but I couldn't blame her. She'd been carrying so much for so long. Her career, the family, and now this betrayal. I'll do whatever it takes, I said softly. I'll give you space if you need it. I'll go to counseling. Whatever you need, Emma. Just don't give up on us. She sighed, leaning back into the couch. Part of me wants to, she admitted, her voice raw. Part of me is so angry and hurt that I think it would be easier to walk away. But then I think about Sophia, about everything we've built together, and I can't make myself take that step. I reached out, hesitating for a moment before gently placing my hand on hers. I don't deserve it, but thank you, I said, for giving us a chance. She didn't pull her hand away, but she didn't squeeze mine back either. This is going to take time, she said, her voice cautious. A lot of time, and things are going to have to change, John. For both of us. I know, I said, and I'm ready. For the first time in weeks, it felt like there was a glimmer of hope, fragile and uncertain, but there nonetheless. The days after that conversation were a mix of tentative steps forward and painful reminders of how much had been broken. Emma and I moved around each other carefully, like strangers trying to relearn old routines. We weren't okay. Not yet, but there was an unspoken agreement to try, to at least give ourselves a chance. Sophia kept her distance for the most part. She'd always been sharp and independent, but now there was an edge to her that hadn't been there before. One night, I found her in her room, earbuds in and her sketch pad open on her desk. I knocked softly on the doorframe, and she glanced up, her expression wary. Hey, I said, stepping inside. Can we talk? She shrugged but didn't say no, so I sat down on the edge of her bed. I know I've let you down, I said, my voice steady but full of regret. And I know it's going to take a long time to rebuild the trust I've broken. But I want you to know I'm not going anywhere. I'm still your dad, and I love you more than anything. She didn't respond right away, her pencil moving in slow, deliberate strokes across the paper. Finally, she set it down and looked at me. You really hurt Mom, she said quietly. And you hurt me too. I know, I said, my chest tightening. And I hate that I did. I'm so sorry, sophomore. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to both of you. She studied me for a moment, her expression softening just slightly. Okay, she said finally. But it's going to take time. I nodded, knowing that was more than I deserved. Downstairs, Emma and I had started talking more, small conversations at first, about Sophia's school projects or dinner plans. They weren't the deep, meaningful talks I wanted, but they were a start. We agreed to go to counseling together, and I started looking into therapists that could help us navigate this mess. Lily's absence was noticeable, but it was also a relief in some ways. With her gone, the house felt less like a battlefield and more like a space where healing might be possible. I hoped she was finding her way too, even if her departure had been the necessary first step toward rebuilding what she had helped fracture. One night, as Emma and I sat on the couch watching a show neither of us was really paying attention to, she reached over and took my hand. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a sign that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. The road ahead was uncertain, and there were no guarantees. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like we had a chance. And sometimes, a chance is all you need.